Hello, my name is Patricia White and I work for the Family Support Program and the Northwest Arkansas Community Parent Resource Center. We are a program of Arkansas Support Network. This presentation is about transition planning in high school and what can be done to help the student transition from high school to the real world after high school. So, what is transition? Under IDEA, or Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, transition is a results-oriented process that's focused on improving the academic and functional achievements of a student with a disability in order to facilitate that student's movement from school to post-school activities. The team needs to decide what type of classes that student needs, or perhaps what type of skills that student needs to learn in order to achieve the goals that the child has chosen to obtain once they graduate from high school. In other words, what does that student need to achieve their dream? When creating the transition plan, the team needs to take into account the student's strengths, preferences, and interests in determining what goals the students want to achieve after high school. So the team needs to find out what the student's good at. What areas do they excel in? What are their likes and dislikes? What are their interests? What brings them joy? And this plan needs to be centered around the student's strengths, preferences, and interests, and not what the parents or the teachers think is best for the student. Transition planning includes instructions such as academics, functional skills, and independent living skills. Related services could include various types of therapies. Community experiences could include perhaps going to the store to work on making appropriate purchases, or maybe ordering a meal at a restaurant. Employment activities could include job shadowing or attending a community-based job training program. Adult living objectives could include independent living skills, such as perhaps filling out an application for an apartment or a job. Daily living skills could include learning how to make doctor's appointments, paying bills, accessing public transportation, or really importantly, learning to cook. The school, as well as your local rehab service, can provide a variety of interest surveys that can give good information on the student's interests and skills. Federal law states that the transition plan must be in place no later than the first IEP to be in effect when the student turns 16, and it's updated at least annually thereafter. Now, you can update the plan more often if needed. Sometimes the student's interests change throughout high school, and then the classes that they thought they needed might need to be changed, just in case the student's interest changes. Some students, particularly those that are interested in attending college, can start the transition planning as early as age 14, and this would be important for students who need to start taking the correct classes in the 9th grade so that they can follow through on their chosen career path after high school, whether it's college or particular vocational program. Under IDEA, students with disabilities can continue to attend school until the age of 21 or 22, if that is the choice of the IEP team. Who needs to be attending these transition planning meetings? Obviously, the student is the most important person in the meeting. They need to be able to express their wishes and their desires for their own future. The public school must do everything they can to encourage the student to attend their transition planning meeting. As I just stated, the team should encourage the student to attend their own IEP and transition meetings. As adults, they need to have the ability to speak up for themselves and express their own wants and needs. As parents, we need to teach and encourage our children to be as independent as possible. After all, they're going to be an adult one day, and we may not always be around to speak for them. As a team, we need to encourage the student to speak for themselves, and we need to be ready to listen. While the school must do everything they can to encourage the student to attend, there are just times when it isn't possible. At that time, the school must ensure that the student's preference and interests are considered in the meeting. The school can do this by having the student fill out some interest surveys which details the student's strengths and interests. The student can also write up a paragraph or two stating their own thoughts and dreams for their future, and then this is presented to the team. The school can also invite any outside agency that might be helping the student towards their transition goals. This could include not only agencies that will be working directly with the student, but also any agency that might be paying for those services. Why should parents be part of the transition planning? Well, parents usually know their child better than anyone else. Parents are familiar with their child's dreams and abilities. Parents are more familiar with their child's attitudes and their method of doing things. Parents are the one constant factor in that child's life, and parents can relate this information to the team. Also, having a parent present may make the student more comfortable about expressing their own dreams. Sometimes different families have different values, whether it's religious values, cultural values, or moral values, and these values can come into play when creating a transition plan. Because parents are involved in the transition planning at school, they can also reinforce the student's education at home. This could be in the form of maybe chores around the house, learning independent living skills, after-school job, or perhaps working on a school project. Parents can also help that student think through their decisions and show support for the student, even if mistakes are made. As parents, we need to know when to encourage our child and when to back off and let our child fly. Who else needs to be a part of this transition planning? Well, obviously the parent and the student are most important. Other individuals should include a general ed teacher who is familiar with the student, a special ed teacher who's been working with the student, and then others might be a principal or assistant principal, a counselor, the special ed director, a psych specialist, or any other district personnel who might be involved with that student. You can also invite any therapist or professional from outside of the school. If that out-of-school professional is unable to attend the meeting, you can always bring a letter of recommendation from that professional to the meeting. And don't forget the person or agency that's going to be able to provide funding for the transition training, especially if it involves transportation to community activities. Okay, we're in. Now what happens? Why are we planning for this child's transition after high school? After all, they've still got a few years of high school left. Let me ask you this. Do you make a plan for vacation, or buying a house, or changing your career? You need to put as much, if not more, time into planning for your child's future. You want to make sure that your child has a successful transition into adult life. Planning helps you follow through on your child's hopes and dreams. Now, this is the time to do some research. What's out there? Is this something my child actually wants to do? What is it going to cost? Is there an application process? Is there a waiting list? What are some classes needed to help my child move forward? Just remember, the plans you make now can help reduce the fears that can come up in the future. To start planning, we first need to figure out what services are needed. While IDEA does not specifically identify what the services are, there is a process that can be used to identify those services. This process is basically the same as the process used to determine other educational needs and includes such things as observations, anecdotal information, and various types of evaluations and surveys. This information can help educators and parents determine what interests and skills the student has and what areas still need improvement, and that could be in academics, independent living, or in social skills. And while IDEA states the coordinated set of activities must include instruction, community experiences, and the development of employment and other adult living objectives, there may be occasions when some of these services are not provided to a student if the IEP team agrees. This would depend on what the student's interests are and what courses they really need additional education in. However, whatever the decision is, remember, it must be a team decision, not just a teacher's decision or a parent's decision, and it must center on the need of the student. Here are some things to discuss in the transition meeting. And remember, there should be at least one a year during high school. As I stated earlier, the responsibility of the team is to look at the student's skills and knowledge in order to determine what course of action is needed to prepare the student for success after graduation. What areas are they competent in and what areas need additional attention? What type of evaluations are needed to make this determination? The next few slides are going to go into more detail regarding the different areas to consider. So what is involved in transition planning, really? The team needs to look at 3 areas. What type of employment is the student interested in, and what will it take to gain this employment? Is the student interested in furthering their education with either college or some type of vocational training? Number 3, what are the student's plans for independent living and community involvement, and what skills does that student need to access the community? Let's look at employment first. Is this potential job realistic? Does the student have the skills, knowledge, and ability to perform the job? What is the student interested in? What would they like to do? What jobs are available? What are the resources needed to make this employment happen? Who has some connection to make it happen? What about accommodations? Some accommodations could be accessible parking, access to the workplace, special equipment at the desk, special tools or equipment, etc. Job coaches and supported employment may be an option and are offered through various services in the state. This slide shows a variety of different questions to ask in the transition meeting in order to determine what the student will need for successful transition to employment after school. The various interest surveys can help determine what the student would like to do and what areas they excel in. The team needs to determine what type of assistance, training, or job skills the student will need, and how are they going to acquire this information, whether it be through volunteer work, classes, or possibly direct training. So look at these questions and discuss them. Look at the information that you already have. Get information from outside resources, and consider any other information the team has gathered. You want a variety of different people in the meeting because they all look at this from different perspectives and come with different information and different ideas. These ideas all need to be listed in the transition plan. A transition plan should also discuss any further education after high school. This could include a community college, a university, or vocational education. Many of these institutions have a program on campus to help individuals with disabilities obtain higher education and to provide the resources and accommodations needed to make their education a success. Some other methods of additional education after high school could include trade school, a job training program, or perhaps an online course. If this is the path the student wants to take, it needs to be listed in the transition plan. This slide shows a variety of questions to ask if the student is considering continuing their education after high school. What classes will the student need to take to graduate and get into college or trade school? Different institutions of higher education have different requirements. Different career paths require different classes. If the student wants to be a nurse, they might want to take some science classes. If they want to be an engineer, they should probably take math classes. The team needs to look at what else the student needs to get into the higher education setting. Will they need to take the ACT or some sort of college entrance exams? Do they need to fill out applications for scholarships and financial aid? Really important there. How early do they need to apply for college entrance and what is needed? These are all questions that the team needs to address and provide the steps in the transition plan. The third area to look at is independent living. Not only does the team need to address where the student will live, but also what type of activities the student wants to participate in. And then there's a huge question of transportation. How will the student get to the store, a job, college, or other activities? What type of transportation options are available in the community? These areas need to be looked at, and if specific training is required to gain independent living, the training needs to be included as part of that transition plan. This slide discusses some issues that the team needs to address for independent living. Where will the student live once they graduate from high school? Will they continue to live at home with their parents? Will they have a roommate? Will they live in a dorm? Or as many individuals this age, do they want to live on their own? And what type of community do they want to live in? People move all the time, so you can't make this decision for the rest of their life, but it just gives you a place to start. And the team needs to assure that the community is a safe place to live. The team also needs to decide what type of community involvement the individual might want to participate in and how they will access their community. Those activities could include getting to class, their job, the store, the bank, their friends, etc., etc. The team needs to look at what type of resources will be available to the student. This brings up that all-important subject of transportation. We've mentioned this before. Without transportation, the individual can become very isolated and is unable to interact within their community. So what skills are going to be needed for the student to move out on their own, and can these skills be incorporated into their education? This could include purchasing the needed ingredients and preparing a healthy meal, or managing their finances, or doing basic housekeeping, managing their property. Again, the list goes on. Maybe they'll need a care manager to help with some of these areas of independent living. Guardianship is a very serious issue to discuss. Guardianship legally removes that individual's right to make their own decisions. Now, there are a few individuals who need guardianship to protect their right to a safe and healthy life. These are individuals who are totally unable to make their own decisions. However, this is a legal decision requiring a court order, and I really urge you to consider this carefully before making this determination. There are other alternatives, such as power of attorney. This matter really needs to be discussed with an attorney. The next question to ask is, what is included in the IEP regarding transition goals? Well, first and foremost, it must be appropriate for that specific student. So making a transition plan for, say, a student with a severe visual impairment to become an airplane pilot is not a good idea. However, a student with a physical disability could most definitely become a doctor. The goals must also be measurable. You don't want the plan to state something like, the student will have a good life. It's just not measurable. Doesn't tell you anything. The goals need to be specific and detailed so everyone on the team knows how to work on the goals, what steps to take, and whether the goals have been met. Another tool that can be used in creating a transition plan are the transition assessments, and I've mentioned these before. There are a wide variety of assessments available, and these assessments can be used to determine the student's interests as well as their strengths. Are they good in math or numbers? Do they enjoy science or art? These assessments can be given in a variety of formats also, and this will allow a student who has a communication disability or perhaps a physical disability to give their answers in a format that works for them. So as I stated earlier, the plan must list the classes that will allow the student to achieve their goals after high school. Overall, the point of the transition plan is to assist the student in reaching their goals for independent living after high school. Here are some other things to look at when creating the transition plan. What is available in the community to assist the student? Is there a job training program through the school or through some other agency in the community? Some community agencies have programs that can work with the student either during the school day or perhaps during the summer. So what modifications are going to be needed to access these programs? Transportation. Mentioned this before. Is there a form of public transportation or some way of transporting that student to the job training site? Is the job site accessible? Does the equipment need to be modified so the student can actually use the equipment? And then who's going to help the student access the community resources? Are there other agencies who could provide services, and are they present at the transition planning meeting? They need to be. Make sure these resources are all written into the IEP. Here are some additional tips on planning for the IEP and transition plan. Now, some of these have already been mentioned, but I'm going to mention them again. Most importantly, find out what the student wants to do. After all, this is about helping provide a positive transition for the student so that they can lead a successful life. So start by making a list of their abilities, skills, and needs. And this information is going to help guide the team in the right direction. And really encourage the student to attend their meeting and enable them to speak up for themselves. If success is to be achieved, individuals must learn to advocate for themselves. Look into what type of accommodations would be needed to provide appropriate supports for the students, either at college, places of employment, or living accommodations. Identify who will be responsible for following through on the various different parts of the transition plan. This could include transportation to a job training site, providing appropriate equipment for learning independent living skills, or even taking the student to the store to work on shopping and managing money. Make sure you clarify that the IEP and transition plan is geared towards the student's goals, whether they're academic goals or practical goals. If the student does plan on attending college after high school, then their plan needs to be primarily academic to enhance their ability to get into college. Again, if the student is planning on attending college, make sure that the classes they need to take in high school are listed in the transition plan. Will the student need to take the ACT or the SAT? If so, what classes will help them pass those exams? And then what accommodations are needed to take the ACT or the SAT? Discuss when the student will graduate. As I stated earlier, a student with an IEP could stay in high school until they're 21 years of age, but this may not be necessary, but it does need to be a team decision. If the student does not want to attend college and wants to get a job, what classes are needed to get him a job in the area that he or she is interested? For example, if the student wants to work on a farm, then they need to be taking some agricultural classes. Many of these classes are not actually offered in special ed classrooms. So determine how the goals can be integrated into the regular education curriculum and what modifications will be needed to succeed in those classrooms. And prior to the meeting, decide what outside agency should be attending the transition meeting and be sure to invite them in advance. And it's really a good idea to let the school know in advance who is coming so that they can arrange for plenty of space for the meeting. So let's discuss some of the agencies that might participate in the transition process. Obviously, the public school will be the primary agency that will provide most of the services that the student will need in order to work towards their transition goals. And, of course, if the school is involved, it needs to be stated in the student's IEP. You can, however, invite other agencies to attend the transition planning meeting. There is a place on the IEP paperwork to list those various agencies and their responsibilities for the student's success. You want those other agencies to attend so that they can provide information about their various programs that they offer and any funding source that they may be able to provide. Very important piece. Having this information will help you make a quality transition plan for that student. You can invite anyone you want to this meeting as long as that person has an interest in the student. You might want to consider someone from your local vocational rehabilitation center because they can help provide some of the funding that your student might need. Invite local service providers from agencies that might offer job training or independent living services. Ask individuals from institutions of higher education, such as a local university or community college, or at least bring information from them if you can't get somebody from there to actually come. Most schools have transition specialists that can also provide useful information. And feel free to invite someone to help advocate for the student, whether it's a family member, a friend, or maybe somebody from an advocacy agency. This slide is pretty self-explanatory. It says that under IDEA, or Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the transition services should be provided in a variety of locations. The instruction should be provided in the school as well as in the community setting. And the plan should include the goals that I mentioned earlier, such as employment, post-high school education, and daily living skills. So how can the parents increase their child's self-advocacy skills? As I've stated before, encourage them to attend their own meetings. This can start as early as they're able to understand what's going on, which could mean attending as early as elementary school. Give the student plenty of opportunity to discuss their hopes and dreams for the future. Explore different ideas and see what sparks their interest. Keep in mind that the student might change their mind throughout high school, but that's normal. And even as adults, we change our minds sometimes. Give the child responsibilities at home, which could be doing laundry or helping with the cooking meals. This provides the opportunity to learn skills that they're going to need after high school. Allow the student to make choices so that they can learn to speak up for themselves and learn the consequences of their choices. As adults, we have to make choices all the time, and this is a great skill to learn as that student works towards independence. By making choices and discussing dreams, the student is learning to speak up for themselves, which, as an adult, is a very valuable tool. While we should assure that the student understands their disability, we should also stress their ability. Teach the student how to problem solve and how to ask for things like modifications and accommodations. The student should also understand their rights under Americans with Disabilities Act. Perhaps do some role-playing at home and encourage the student to speak up for themselves. Make sure that the school offers community-based experiences that help the student reach their goal. This could include going on a shopping trip to understand finances or how to make appropriate purchases. Or it could include a field trip to learn some different jobs. Or maybe going to various institutions of higher education such as the U of A or Northwest Technical Institute. Remember, if the student wishes to attend college, they need to take the appropriate academic classes so that they can graduate with the appropriate credits. Some communities have self-advocacy groups that would help the student develop those advocacy skills. So check with your community, see if they have anything like this that would help the student. And if not, perhaps this is something that could be started at the high school level. Let's talk about some other things that need to be considered during the transition planning. When a student turns 18 years of age, they become a legal adult. This means that all information regarding that student is now confidential, and you, as a parent, aren't allowed to access that information without the consent of the student. This information can include educational information, medical information, legal information, etc. As a parent, you're not even allowed to get medical records without a consent from the student. If you feel your child is not able to make good decisions at this time, you can get guardianship. But please, please keep in mind that guardianship legally takes away that individual's right to make their own decisions. This is a very, very serious decision and not something to take lightly. Of course, we all realize that a lot of 18-year-olds don't know how to make good decisions, but that's just part of life. I'm referring to individuals who don't have the capability to make decisions. Another option is power of attorney. This means that your young adult grants you permission to be part of the decision-making process and to obtain information without that individual present. However, the individual involved must be competent enough to understand and sign the power of attorney. Another option is supported decision-making. Supported decision-making, or SDM, is a tool that allows people with disabilities to retain their decision-making capacity by choosing trusted supporters to help them make those choices. Something else that's new is the ABLE Act. The full name is the Achieving a Better Life Experience Act. This bill provides an avenue for the individual or the parents or other family members to put money into a special savings account so that their child with special needs have assets available to them without affecting any government benefits such as Medicaid or waiver. You can also set up a supplemental needs trust to assist in providing additional assets for your child in the future. And last but not least, all male students must sign up for selective service, whether they have a disability or not. The only exemption is if the individual is living in an institution or homebound. This doesn't mean they're going to be drafted, especially since we haven't had the draft since 1973. However, if for some reason the draft were to resume, all individuals would be evaluated for their ability to serve, and individuals with disabilities would be exempt. So here are a few resources that can be accessed in Northwest Arkansas. Arkansas Rehab provides a variety of resources, including referrals and funding for things like job training and education. The DDS waiver provides in-home supports for individuals with disabilities so that they can live as independently as possible in the community of their choice. However, keep in mind there's a long waiting list for this program, so sign up early. NWAC and the U of A both have programs to support individuals with disabilities. Arkansas Support Network has several different options for job training and vocational support. And SSI can help individuals with monthly financial help as well as Medicaid. The really good thing about this is that after the child turns 18, they're eligible for SSI without considering household income or parents' resources. It's based solely on the individual's disability, income, and resources. Let's review the information one more time. The point of the transition plan is to prepare a student with special needs to move from high school into the real world beyond high school. IDEA states that the plan must be in place no later than age 16, but can be started at age 14, and the transition plan must be part of the student's IEP. Remember, the transition plan is developed by the whole IEP team, which needs to include not only the student, but any outside agencies that might be working with that student. The plan needs to be centered around the student's needs, preferences, and interests, and it needs to include further education, employment, and independent living goals. So the point of the transition plan is to create a coordinated set of activities oriented towards producing results for the student involved. This last slide gives you a visual of some of the areas to be considered when planning for transition to adult life. Government assistance such as SSI and Medicaid, community supports, independent living, employment, higher education, job training support, and Arkansas Rehab Services. Work with your transition coordinator at your school to find out about specific transition supports and the various agencies in your area that provide those supports. And the internet is also a valuable tool when doing research on what options are available. Well, that's our presentation on transition to adult life. I hope you learned something useful. If you have any questions about transition, please feel free to call. You can also go to our website or email us. Thank you so much for taking time to listen to our presentation.